Ignition sequence start.
Good morning and welcome to Mission Control Houston and the International Space Station Flight Control Room. These specialists on console are monitoring systems on the orbiting laboratory and working with the Expedition 61 crew members as they press ahead through the last few hours of another busy work week on orbit. The week kicked off with the arrival of a record shipment of supplies on a Cygnus cargo ship, and that included the rest of the hardware that was needed for an ambitious set of spacewalks needed to repair the cooling system in the station's single largest scientific instrument.
Welcome to Space to Ground. I'm Kathryn Clayton. The International Space Station just received a fresh delivery of over 4 tons of science and supplies. Northrop Grumman's Cygnus cargo vehicle, NG-12, launched November 2nd from Wallace, Virginia. On November 4th, Expedition 61 astronauts Jessica Meir and Christina Cook used the space station's robotic arm to capture Cygnus. After the successful berthing, the work began to unload over 8,200 pounds of cargo inside the vehicle. While this is a record-breaking amount of cargo for Cygnus, the arrival of NG-12 is also the first time 2 Cygnus vehicles will be in orbit at the same time. NG-12 joins its predecessor, NG-11, which remains in orbit on an extended secondary mission to demonstrate this future capability. NG-12 will remain at the space station until January. This week, Boeing took a crucial step towards returning American spaceflight launch capabilities. Boeing's CST-100 Starliner spacecraft completed a critical safety milestone on Monday in an end-to-end test of its Abort system in White Sands, New Mexico. The test verifies that each of the Starliner safety systems functions separately and together to protect astronauts in the unlikely event of an emergency prior to liftoff by moving them safely away from the launch pad. During the 2-minute test, the Starliner's launch abort engines and orbital maneuvering and altitude control thrusters fired to push the spacecraft about 1 mile above land and 1 mile north of the test stand. The successful pad abort test is another step towards achieving NASA's future missions. Activity outside the station will soon ramp up as the crew prepares for a series of spacewalks to repair the largest scientific instrument on the station. The Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer 2 is a subatomic particle detector that looks for dark matter, antimatter, and measures cosmic rays. AMS-2 took 16 countries nearly 20 years to develop and was installed on the space station in 2011. The repair of the AMS-2 cooling system will ensure that it can continue to provide more data and more groundbreaking science. Experts will discuss plans for the spacewalks and the future of AMS-2 in a series of briefings on Tuesday, November 12th on NASA TV and nasa.gov. Keep sending in your questions using the hashtag AskNASA, and we'll see you next week.
Flight engineer Jessica Meir was one of the astronauts at the controls of the robotic arm for Monday's Cygnus operations, putting to use some of the education she acquired in the years of space station mission training she received prior to her launch. And that was on top of what Meir already knew while earning a bachelor's degree in biology and a master's in space science and a doctorate in marine biology. And yet little of all that formal education much mattered when she agreed to sit down with us before she left Houston for a barrage of non-technical questions. Take a look.
Clock has started. Roger.
What's your favorite color?
Green.
Favorite book?
Anna Karenina or Galapagos by Kurt Vonnegut.
Favorite song?
Probably anything by The National.
Are you a morning person or a night person?
Definitely not a morning person.
What's one thing you're afraid of?
My plant's dying while I'm on the space station.
Who is the person who makes you laugh the most?
My best friend from college, Jacqueline.
What is something you do outside of work to have fun?
Spend time in the outdoors and nature, hiking, skiing.
What's your favorite animal?
Probably an auk, a seabird like a murre.
If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Definitely to fly.
The most valuable high school or college class that you ever took?
My introductory biology class at Brown.
Most important advice you would give to your younger self?
Appreciate and enjoy the moment.
Who inspires you?
My mentor from grad school, Jerry Koyman.
What's a goal you plan on achieving this year?
to fulfill my future plans from my high school yearbook to go for a spacewalk.
If you could spend one day on Mars, what would you do there for fun?
Explore. Maybe some kind of sand dune surfing.
The International Space Station is a laboratory in space where scientists can do research in a variety of scientific disciplines and remove the constant of gravity from the equation in ways they can't do on Earth. In natural sciences, this is especially useful. For instance, in finding out how surface tension and capillary flow can be harnessed to move fluids in more efficient ways. What might look like someone just having fun can actually help improve systems for moving fluids in microgravity, such as moving propellants in fuel tanks during space travel. The International Space Station's laboratory modules support experiments in a number of scientific disciplines. For example, the Flame Design experiment is looking into the quantity of soot produced under a number of different burning conditions, and that could produce data that will lead to the creation of new burners that are more efficient and less polluting. We've shown you a couple of experiments taking place in the International Space Station. Here's another one, but we're going to look at it up close. Last year, flight engineer Serena Onen-Chancellor turned on a camera while working with the Angie X cancer therapy experiment and let us watch as she grew and examined certain cells. This is an effort to find out if the cells grown in space can improve testing methods on the ground for certain cancer therapy medications.
Hey, good morning and welcome to ISS. Today I am working on the Angie X cancer trials up here on ISS. We've actually spent quite a bit of time working on this. And what we're looking at here is something called an endothelial cell. And an endothelial cell, you find these cells in every blood vessel in your body. And so people wonder why we're growing these cells up on ISS. And scientists believe that cells in the body grow very similar up here on ISS. A lot of times scientists try and grow these endothelial cells in the ground and they don't live for very long. And they think for some reason they grow better up here in space. And that's one of the things we're testing on orbit here. And you can see some of these cells right here on the computer. So why is this important? Well, endothelial cells help form blood supply. And tumors need blood supply to get bigger and bigger. And all of us have had someone impacted by cancer, whether it's a family member or a friend. And so we're always thinking, how can we fight this cancer? Well, one thing we're looking at is, can we grow these cells on orbit to test new cancer drugs to prevent that blood supply from growing? And if we can stop that tumor blood supply from growing, then we can help beat that cancer. So that's just one of the science experiments we're looking at here on the space station. This is where all the cells live in their biocell habitat. And when we're done working with them, we put them in something called Sable 2, which is up in the ceiling for ISS. And it feels all nice and warm and comfortable, because it is, because it's just like the temperature of the human body. And so we let the cells live and grow there, and we've had them for almost 2 months now up here on ISS. We feed them, we give them nutrients, and they basically live. They're like miniature crew members living with us. So we're going to this new biocell, which is Delta 7. And these biocells here have been treated with varying levels of a cancer chemotherapy drug that is being tested out here on ISS. And so we are looking at the cells, the researchers look at the images that I take for them on the microscope to see how well that drug is impacting the connection between those endothelial cells, to see if it will stop this tumor blood supply from growing. Make sure that's level.
Same position for Forrest and Spaceflighter at the leftmost position for the first image.
Yeah, you can see some of these tubule formations here
That's
also.
a good spot.
Yeah, I agree, it's a good spot. You do see definitely some of the tubule formations here and some of the gaps in between the cells.
Really good representation of both of those. That's a really good spot.
The structure of the International Space Station relies on a series of trusses that are engineered to withstand the forces that the International Space Station encounters in low Earth orbit. In this demonstration video, astronaut Ricky Arnold explains the significance of these resilient structures and the forces that they're up against in microgravity.
Hey there, I'm NASA astronaut Ricky Arnold. Welcome aboard the International Space Station. Today we're going to talk about the Space Station truss. The truss segment is just about 100 meters from side to side.
A truss is a segment or part of the whole integrated truss structure. The trusses are used to support the 16 solar array panels, which provide energy for us, and radiators which get rid of excess heat that builds up inside the space station. The design of the truss involves triangles and beams, which can be seen on Earth in structures like bridges. Why triangles? Well, this is because of their unique geometric properties, their methods of transferring loads, and their spatial openness. Triangles are more rigid than rectangular shapes because they have fewer joints. The larger number of joints in a shape, the more prone that shape is to being impacted by shear forces.
What I'd like to talk a little bit about today is some of the forces that can act upon the truss. Well, the first force I want to talk about is compression force. And compression force is just like it sounds, two things coming together. So if we apply a compression force to the truss, what do you think is going to happen? Well, let me go ahead and do it. And you can see right here where the truss would bend. What do you think the opposite force of compression is? Yeah, it's going to be pulling apart. We call that a tension force. And a tension force is what's going to help maybe even rigidize the truss segment, but it also could potentially pull it apart. I'm not going to pull apart this tape measure because we probably need it later for some work we have to do.
Now, if you look carefully, this next force I want to talk about
Is basically kind of like a twisting force, and we call it torsion. And even when I just let go of the tape measure, you can see it will actually start to happen a little bit. You can start to see, because the center of mass is actually right here, where most of the tape measure is located. And when I let it go, the tape measure itself starts to twist just a little bit. Finally, the fourth force
that can act along a truss segment
is that can occur at a single point where two opposing forces work on a single point along the truss, just like they can upon the Earth's surface. Think about some earthquakes. You can have a plate that is, or along a fault line, where one side of the fault line is moving upward or being forced upward, while the other side is moving downward. And that force in one point in opposite directions is called a shear force. And we can also have that happen on the truss segment. Something like this.
One thing to think about, where do these forces come from?
One force, even though we're up here largely out of the Earth's atmosphere, we do still have drag with the Earth's atmosphere, which can impart loads on or impart a force on the truss segment. Another, I already hinted at earlier, is crew working inside. We're up here, we're exercising, we're moving really heavy pieces of equipment around. So we have an amazing engineering team on the ground, and we have specific disciplines that their job is to monitor all the forces imparted upon the International Space Station. They keep track of all those various forces I talked about and where they could be coming from, the atmosphere, visiting vehicles, or even things that the crew are doing inside the space station, and to make sure that those forces aren't significant enough to cause any damage to this wonderful laboratory and living space we have up here in low Earth orbit. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time. So long.
As part of Project Artemis, NASA's effort to return astronauts to the moon by 2024, scientists are excited about being able to use the water that already exists there to support a sustainable program of exploration. The presence of water on the moon is a relatively recent discovery, and one that opens up exciting possibilities for the future, while sparking some questions about where that water came from.
Exploring the presence of water on the moon. I'm Jim Green, NASA's chief scientist, and this is Science at NASA.
We are going to the moon.
As NASA prepares to return to the moon, one of the many exciting opportunities scientists are preparing for is the ability to use the water that exists there to support human exploration. The presence of water has been a relatively recent discovery, opening up many exciting possibilities for future exploration and just as many questions about the water's origins. In the late 1990s, NASA's Lunar Prospector mission found extra hydrogen at the poles. And where there's hydrogen, there might be water. Enter the L-CROSS mission, designed to determine the type and amount of hydrogen that might be present just below the moon's polar regions. Tony Colopri is a planetary scientist at NASA's Ames Research Center and was the principal investigator for the L-CROSS mission.
To determine the form of hydrogen at the poles, we needed a way to access material below the moon's surface. So we carried a piece of the Atlas rocket we launched on all the way to the moon and directed it into one of the large, permanently shadowed craters near the South Pole, which caused a plume of dust and debris to shoot upwards. We had a probe with 9 different measuring instruments following the plume's 10-mile or 16-kilometer upward trajectory. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter spacecraft was also making observations of the plume while mapping the lunar surface from its orbit around the moon. The lunar dirt in the plume hadn't seen the sun in over 2 billion years. In the sunlight, among other metals and gases, we found water, about 5% by weight.
Now we know there's water on the moon.
Research scientist Jen Hellman is also at Ames She explains why the discovery is much more than just a scientific curiosity.
Ultimately, I believe we'll be living on the moon for extended periods of time, so we need to take advantage of whatever resources we can find there. Water is H2O, a combination of hydrogen and oxygen, and we can break it apart. So now we have a source of hydrogen and oxygen that may be able to be used for rocket fuel, as well as a source of oxygen for breathing. Water on the moon gives you a new paradigm for future space exploration. Very exciting.
In the 10 years since the L-Cross mission, we have continued to study water at the lunar poles from orbit with instruments on several missions. But we still have lots of questions. Where, for instance, did the water come from? Some believe that the water in other volatiles could be remnants of comets and asteroid impacts over billions of years. Others point to recent meteoric showers that can be seen producing water vapor. And where exactly is the water? We've confirmed that water exists in the Cabeus crater near the moon's south pole, where the L-Cross impact occurred. But how plentiful is it? And can we expect to find it in other super cold regions?
We won't be able to answer any of these questions with certainty until we visit the South Pole with robots and astronauts.
Through the Artemis program, NASA is planning to do just that. Thirsting for more information about the changing science of the moon? Visit science.nasa.gov.
One week ago tomorrow, November 2nd, was the 19th anniversary of the arrival of the first expedition crew to the International Space Station. Bill Shepard, Yuri Gidzenka, and Sergei Krikalev kicked off the continuous human presence in space that continues up to right now, supporting scientific research and a platform to test and perfect a new fleet of vehicles. The knowledge we continue to gain from this orbiting laboratory is vital to our future in space.
The International Space Station, a football field-sized, million-pound laboratory flying around planet Earth at 17,500 miles per hour. It's our home in low Earth orbit and the bridge to exploring the far reaches of our solar system. A place to learn what it takes to live, to work, to thrive in space. Thanks to space agencies representing more than a dozen countries around the world, it went from the drawing board to liftoff when the first piece flew into space in 1998. That kicked off over a decade of construction, hauling the station to orbit piece by piece on NASA's space shuttle and Russian rockets. And after the first crew arrived in November 2000, we started an unbroken streak of humans living and working in space. Building on the legacy of past outposts like Skylab and Mir, the International Space Station became the training ground for humanity's next great journeys. Learning how to live in space for extreme periods of time, building and perfecting the technologies necessary to travel to our neighbors in the solar system. It gave us a place right on our doorstep to prepare for the next giant leap into the unknown. And thanks to the station, a new era in outer space is unfolding. What was once the domain of only nations and governments is now populated by a growing space fleet from American industry. Private spacecraft to fly cargo and crew members, new habitats and technologies for future space missions, and an open door for companies, research institutions, and even students around the world to do research in space that have never had the opportunity before. All laying the foundation for a robust economy in space. There have been thousands of experiments, hundreds of spacewalks, endless hours of challenges and successes, all done by humans hailing from countries around the globe. The International Space Station is what we can achieve as a planet when we come together to do the things that are hard. And the work isn't slowing down, because we're ready for the next giant leap. Because we're ready to go farther. Because what we do and learn along the way is for the benefit of all of humankind.
In the 19-plus years of human presence on the International Space Station, many of the 239 different human beings who have been there have undergone a shift in their worldview. Apparently, looking down on the entire world has that effect on people. Fact is, the phenomenon even has a name: the overview effect.
We have ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, all engines running. Launch complete. Liftoff. We
My first sunrise from the Soyuz is a moment I will never forget. You couldn't wipe the smile off of my face. It was really amazing.
Experiencing the views of the Earth, it's just, so incredible. It's just almost overwhelming when you first see it.
As much as we love the pictures that we bring back, it's not the same as seeing it yourself.
There's no words to come close to the ever-changing picture that I see staring at this planet.
If you'd like to get another look at any of the stories that we featured for you today, you can by checking us out on YouTube and Facebook, and there are the specific addresses where you can go. While you're there, you should also look around, because there's lots of cool stuff there about NASA and America's human spaceflight program. While you're out on the internet anyway, how about check out Houston We Have a Podcast? That's where we talk to folks about their work in all aspects of space exploration. New episodes post every Friday. So today, we start a special series related to the upcoming spacewalks on the Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer. Gary Jordan talks today with Assistant Space Station Program Scientist Brandon Riddell about the science being done by the AMS. Later, we'll go more into depth on the spacewalks that are planned and the tools that had to be created in order to complete that work. Go to nasa.gov/podcasts for today's episode. It's where you'll also find all the previous episodes and the full library of all the NASA podcasts, all of which you can also listen to on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and SoundCloud. This is Mission Control, Houston.